Hi, friends. I'm Pastor Terry. We are Dalhousie Church, and this is the 10-Minute Coach. Bless you. I hope you're having a great day. As you can tell from my voice, I am struggling with a cold and have been home the last couple of days, so I'm recording this from home and hope that it's helpful to you as we think about the Gospel of Mark, the second of our inquiries in the new telling of the story of God among us, a part of the big picture teaching series. And the Gospel of Mark is fascinating, and in this big picture series, we've attempted to do kind of some character studies as we've been going along. And so I've attempted to do that with Mark. The difficulty is that there's not scholarly consensus on who the author of the Gospel of Mark is. The historic opinion is that it's John Mark, who was the traveling companion of the Apostle Paul, Silas, Barnabas, and then eventually connected up with Peter in Rome. And the thought is that he dictated or recorded Peter's stories, and that this is how we have the Gospel of Mark. You could call it the Gospel according to Peter. That's the historic opinion. The early church fathers is the opinion that I prefer. I try not to bring kind of this authoritative, well, this is the way it is. There was a generation of preachers who were taught that way, figure out what it is and then bring it authoritatively from the pulpit. The problem was that when somebody came along with a better argument that was more convincing to that listener, the risk was actually that it would undo their faith, that they would find themselves in a position where they would really, well, if that wasn't true, then what else was not true? So I just try to be honest when I can, within the time limits, when there is diversity of scholarly opinion, and to not just kind of give my version of the events. And I respected that a lot in the seminary training that I had, when profs would have us reading across the theological spectrum of scholars that were not what the position that our professors held, but forced us to grapple with that range of, or at least a broader range of scholarly opinion. So hopefully that's helpful to you, and as a life group leader, or as a parent, or as a person just using these as personal and devotional time. That's a bit of an explanation of some of my methodology and thinking. But I have given you some on the back of the sermon notes and the sermon-based questions for further reflection. I've given you a couple of more passages where you could dig into the life of John Mark. It's quite a fascinating thought to begin to think about, well, what would it have been like to be John Mark, having perhaps been there towards the close of Jesus' ministry, and then, well, you can check out those references on the back of the sermon notes. Acts chapter 12, verse 6, Acts chapter 15, verse 36. There's a little bit of insight into what John Mark's life was like, if indeed we have well, it's interesting regardless, but if he is the author of the Gospel according to Mark, then it gives us a little more insight into who this person was. And I find it kind of fascinating that one of the takeaways I get from the Gospel of Mark is this invitation to certainty. The nature of certainty is such that when it comes to historic facts, when it comes to theological understanding, we can never have 100% absolute certainty. We're always looking back at history and saying, well, as best we can tell, this is what happened. We're always looking at theology, and we're saying, well, God is so much greater than I am. I am so finite. He is so infinite. How can I possibly ever understand the breadth and scope of who he is? So a significant measure of humility is really essential when we come to our theological inquiries. But all of that being said, Mark left the traveling companionship of Paul and Barnabas at one point. You can read about that in the passages. What did that mean for him? Was that a period of uncertainty in his faith? Or was it just simply he was exhausted from all the travel? Was it homesickness? He really just wanted to get back to his family. The scriptures don't tell us this. But as I imagine what his life was like, I can imagine that there would be moments of uncertainty. And so I really appreciate that later in his life, which is when he would have met up with Peter in Rome, that later in his life he is sharing with us those things which have led him to a posture of absolute certainty, or as much certainty as is possible. And I hope that's helpful. There will be some in our church family who wrestle with faith. It does not come easily. They have significant doubts. And to doubt is not to betray Jesus. I'm a person who has rarely doubted much. I've questioned, I've dug deeply. I don't know. By God's grace, I feel like He has given me a gift of faith that is really quite unshakable. And even through really difficult seasons of my life, I have never doubted His love for me. I've never doubted the certainty of Him being there. I have always been grateful that I have a companion that walks with me through the valley of the shadow, and who is with me also on the highest places. And that is part of my posture as a worshiper. And there have been times in my life in particular when I've heard the Spirit of God say, "You've been singing these lyrics to me, Terry. Do you mean them?" And I've had to say, "Yes, yes, Lord, I do mean them. Therefore, I will continue to trust, though I don't understand the road that I'm on. I don't see the path ahead." And so I take some of that encouragement from Mark. And so we start into the meaning of the titles of Jesus through the beginning of Mark's Gospel, the first verse in particular of Mark's Gospel, chapter 1. And then I've invited you to think a bit about the allusion. Like, why would Mark kind of appeal to Isaiah? What's the point of that? Why would he allude to Elijah? What's up with those historic biblical characters, what their message was, how they presented? And I don't think we have definitive answers on those. I just think it's worth understanding that Mark is connecting the dots from the new telling of God's story among us back to the foretelling of God's story among us, the prophets, and the ancient telling, the writings from Genesis up until the prophets. And so this is part of the thread that I'm attempting to pull on and help you pull on, help you see that this is connected in this meta-narrative sense, that these are not isolated stories. They're not isolated books of the Bible. They fit together, and the continuity with which they fit together is part of what points to the divine authorship that is undergirding, inspiring, and leading the human authors of the pages of Scripture. And then we get into some interesting things like around, why did Jesus have to be baptized? There's a whole sermon or maybe even a sermon series in that, but I'll invite you to reflect on that a little bit. And I think we want to keep coming back to this question of what is the gospel? What is this good news? And why is it good? If you're with us Christmas Eve, I shared the good news. Now, the one thing I didn't take time to do was to articulate the fact that the good news is really good because the bad news is really bad. And maybe that's a point of reflection for you, a point of conversation for you in your small group. But it does bring us then to this question. Last week, Dan invited us to be those who are following Jesus and challenged us with the significance of what that means. Some chose not to follow Jesus, and so I took us into Mark chapter 6 in order to explore the offense that the Nazarenes took at Jesus, and probably because he grew up among them, they're like, who the heck does this guy think he is? He's the son of a carpenter. He needs to step back into his place. And the reality is that because they took offense at Jesus, they missed the coming of the Messiah. And those who were willing to lay down their preconceptions, lay down their prejudgments, who chose not to live in obstinance, who were willing to say, this isn't what I expected. Jesus did not come in a manner that I thought he would come in. And nonetheless, I have to allow the witness of, in this case, Mark says, the witness of these titles. He is this is the gospel of Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of God, come among us. Elijah spoke of him. Isaiah spoke of him. Elijah is inferred by him. The Father at his baptism endorsed him. and yet many rejected him. And it's part of the reason why I wanted to spend just a little bit of time in exhorting us to guard against being people who take offense. If you ever catch yourself saying, I'm offended, or I'm feeling offended, rebuke yourself and say, why would I take offense? Why would I prejudge someone else? I'm not saying there aren't offensive things in our world. I'm saying that we are to be people who are posturing ourselves to expect the best of others, to believe that there might be a plausible explanation behind something that seems very unfortunate. We want to be people who are putting our faith and our trust in Jesus, trusting that He can turn a bad situation into a great situation. Someone has done something to harm you, but God's not done. The final chapter of the story has not yet been written. I'm hoping these are helpful reflections for you, and that as we unpack the Gospel of Mark, at least superficially, this coming Sunday, that it'll be rich and rewarding for you, for your life group, for your family, as you reflect together. Yeah, there's my timer now. And with that note, thank you for joining with me. I'm Pastor Terry Lee. We are Dalhousie Church, and this has been the 11-Minute Coach. Bless you, and bye for now.